Greetings from the internet to the internet. My name is Matt, and this is Chad, and as ever, we are the Comic Watchers, and this is our show. Coming to us this week, we have the awesomely talented Sarah Cho, writer of AWA's Red Light. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. You're very kind. Very excited to be here, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Before as we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself and your history with comic books.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually the first comic that I've ever written. So it's kind of my first foray into the medium. Before this, I worked as a screenwriter, and I still do work as a screenwriter in TV and movies. But when I was young, I got really into manga. I read a lot of comic books. I'm still obsessed with anime and sort of that world as well too. And so that's kind of a little bit of my background.
Was there a particular book that you remember reading um, first, or kind of the one that kind of grabbed your interest?
Yeah, I think in the comic book world, the Killing Joke in the Batman series, I think is probably one that's the most memorable to me and one of my favorites. I tend to like the dark and the bloody, and so that's kind of where
I
my
wouldn't have
taste.
gotten that from reading your comic.
Not at all, right? Red Light's very, very lighthearted. Um,
Yeah.
And then on the manga side, my favorites growing up were Ice Shield 21, Skip Beat, and Decree Man. So it's kind of some throwbacks.
Okay. So tell us a bit about the series Red Light.
Yeah,
What's
so
the big picture?
yeah, so Red Light is set in the near future, and it's about the first AI that's programmed with real human empathy. And of course, she works at a brothel, and she services clients. But she's trapped at that brothel by a man known as Mister, who never lets her leave the premises. And she's obsessed with the outside world, like Ariel from The Little Mermaid. And when she meets a young girl named Natalie, who's also trapped at the brothel, it inspires her to want to escape. And so that's kind of how we start off Red Light.
So, what was the inspiration for this dark? um, because this is where AI is going anyway. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's a few different strands that kind of inspired this series. I think one, like you're talking about, this is where AI is going. And I think, sex has always been at the forefront of technology, whether it's the internet with pornography or even the printing press. I think sex is always a huge motivator for innovation. I think too, I had a lot of conversations. I wouldn't say a lot, but a few conversations with writers who mentioned that a lot of people go to sex workers in order to just have a conversation and to talk to them and to be heard and seen. So that was kind of the second place that I really drew inspiration from. And the last is my own life. Uh, I've been through a lot in my life, and I also think that I have a pretty high degree of empathy because of it. And so I wanted to really write a series that's focused on that and explores this idea of empathy, the dangers of over empathy, but also the importance of it. And so that's kind of how Red Light came to be.
so we have the characters. Did you when you were developing them, did you use like any, how did you model your characters? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, Lacey is a better version of me. So it's me without all of my flaws, which I have many. But she's kind of uh, very pure, very childlike, and extremely empathetic. She cares about everyone, even if they're terrible people and even if they're terrible to her. It's very reflective of how I was when I was younger. I would often like write off a lot of terrible things that people did because I would kind of rationalize that, oh, they've been through this as a child. And so it influences them to act in this way. And that's kind of how Lacey came to be. Natalie is also roughly based on me, but when I was young, like very young, I was a very angry child. um, and so, when I was 12 years old, I didn't take shit. I wasn't really scared of anyone. And that's kind of how these two characters came to be. And I think they complement each other very well. It's very much kind of like Lacey's kind of healing her inner child in a lot of ways, and Lacey herself is a child in a lot of ways. And so that's kind of how these characters were modeled.
And
I'm
anything for Mister?
Mr. is roughly based on an amalgamation of some very bad exes that I had. Not an exaggerated version, of
Yeah,
course, nowhere near as bad as Mr., but some of the traits, just a little bit.
go ahead, Matt.
Yeah. So I'm curious as to how you chose comics as the medium to tell this story, especially since your background is in screenwriting.
Yeah, I think comics is a medium that I've always been drawn to. And, even when I was a kid, I always wanted to actually work in this medium. I think it is so powerful and so impactful. And I think that you can get away with a lot in comics that wouldn't necessarily translate to like a live action. There can be a lot more sex and still be tasteful. There can be a lot more violence and still be tasteful. And there's sort of a beauty to comics, and there's a dark place that you can go with them that you can't really achieve in other mediums.
So, how was it making the transition from screenwriting to, you know, comics?
It really honestly wasn't too hard for me. I have a background before I was a writer. I worked as like a videographer and editor. And so, I already kind of envision story very visually, and kind of in cuts and and pacing. And so I think it came pretty naturally to me in writing a comic book from my, even though I come from a screenwriting background, and, directing is something that I've always been drawn to as well. And I think being a comic book writer is in a lot of ways like being a director.
And tell us about the rest of the creative team that you work with on this book, because the art is just beautiful.
Yeah, Priscilla Petratus, absolutely incredible. She is so talented. I am unbelievably lucky to have her on this project. The coloring is absolutely fantastic. The lettering is also very fantastic. We have a terrific editorial team at AWA. And this project really couldn't come about without any single one of them. You know, I had an idea and I had a story, but they were the ones who really brought it to life, and they really brought their own ideas to the table and really elevated it to the next level.
I know that with our other conversations with AWA creators, they are willing, they seem to be willing to take chances on stories like this. Is that what you found? And how were you approached by AWA, or were you kind of shopping it around? Or
Yeah, so I was approached by AWA. I don't remember the year. It was a couple years ago, but I had a TV screenplay that was going around town. It was actually in the horror genre, and Axel, who is the chief creative officer at AWA, read it and immediately gravitated towards my writing. And when he read my writing, he thought, this girl can write comic books as well. So kind of had a meeting. I had this idea for Red Light, and it sparked to him, and kind of the rest is history. And the AWA team and Axel and everyone who works there are really fantastic people. And it's been a real pleasure working with them, and I'm so blessed to have found them and
So your
found it.
first experience as a comics pro, and you're just spoiled now. So
No, absolutely. Yeah. Like these people are like genuinely good people, very talented, very good at what they do. Yeah, I'm very spoiled.
so when
and
it
did
comes,
they? Oh, sorry.
oh, you're good.
I was
When
gonna
it
say,
comes to the world that these characters inhabit, I'm curious, like, what sort of sci-fi inspirations did you draw from? Because there's I mean, like all the best sci-fi, right? Like this is highly plausible and maybe no more than 5 years away. I don't know. Um, but I'd love to hear a little bit of that side of the story's origins.
Yeah, so I think there were a few places that I drew inspiration from. One is Ghost in the Shell, another is Blade Runner, and then the last one is Ex Machina. And I think all three do a really terrific job of not only exploring AI, but exploring the dark side of humanity when it comes to treating these AI creatures or humans or whatever you want to call it. And I'll also actually just throw one more in is Steven Spielberg's AI. That movie was also a big inspiration for me, particularly when Lacey goes out in the world. A lot of that is drawn from scenes from that movie and kind of what really sparked to me from that film.
Did you have to do a lot of research, when you were like coming up with technical things for so you could write the AI, the character and all that?
A little bit, but I am already a little bit familiar with AI. I actually have a part-time job as an AI trainer, which is a little bit existential. um, and so I have a little bit of a background in it. And I also just kind of thought about what the world would look like 50 years from now, looking at how it is right now and how it could expand and grow and develop into the future. And so, for example, like the robot rumbles is kind of an offshoot of what UFC fights are right now.
When you used the red and blue, my first thought was Rockin' Sockin' Robots.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. A little nostalgia, childhood nostalgia.
So even with your background as a videographer, did Priscilla help you get, with panel layout and transitions and just kind of making sure that the story flows on the
Yeah,
page?
absolutely. I wrote the scripts, and then when I got the pages back, she was able to take it, like I said before, to the next level. And she thought of transitions that I had never thought of. She thought of really out of the box ideas. She really has such a unique and incredible eye for illustrative art. And so, like I said, like red light would not be possible without her. And I'm very lucky that AWA paired us together for this project.
Oh, so they paired you. They did they give you like say here are some artists. Which one do you think works well? Or
I think basically they looked at my idea, and it's very sexual in nature, but it's also feminist. And Priscilla had worked on Hit Me, which is another AWA title, which is also very sexual and very feminist. And so I think that they thought we were kind of a match made in heaven. And I looked at her work and I was like, yeah, this is terrific. I read Hit Me. I thought it was fantastic. And so I was more than happy to work with her.
So I'm curious now about how did you go about researching the sex working trade? I mean, I can speculate, but I'm just curious, like, what does that look like in practical terms?
um, I feel like this has been a lifelong thing. uh, I've never worked in sex work personally, but my work has always dealt with blood, drugs, death, murder, sex. And I'm a huge advocate for destigmatizing sex work in order to protect the women that work in the industry, and also because sex is a natural thing and it's not something that should be taboo or people should be ashamed of. It's biological. And so a lot of my work deals with a lot of sexual themes. And I have had made friends with like sex workers here and there. I've read a lot of literature that deals with sex work. I've watched a lot of film that deals with sex work. Yeah, I've lived a little bit of my life. So I think that's kind of where a lot of my research comes from.
I got you. I got you.
Yeah.
And I like what you said about destigmatizing it because I mean, at the end of the day, as long as both people are consenting,
Yeah.
I mean, who's it really hurting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, and bringing it out of the shadows and out of the stigma and the taboo. Well, I think that's really admirable that you're an advocate for that because I think doing that would help protect the women and men who are sex workers.
Absolutely. It's a victimless crime. And when you put it in the shadows, like you phrased it, you really keep these women and these men in a very vulnerable position and very susceptible to crime. And, there's countless real life examples of that. And I think when you look at other countries that have legalized it or have some protocols around it, you see like an increase in safety for these workers.
Mhm.
And yeah, at the end of the day, sex is sex and everyone does it. And people who shame others for it, I don't think have done enough self-reflection
Yeah,
um, about on themselves.
I mean,
Uh,
it's the morality police, right? And I mean the anti-prostitution laws are morality laws, and I don't think we or any other country should be in the business of uh, literally policing other people's morals like that.
yeah, agreed. Yeah,
Again, assuming everyone's consenting, assuming, um, et cetera, assuming. So, yeah, that's my soapbox talk about sex work and legalizing it. And thank you for joining me in
yeah, no. I,
that little tangent that is very relevant to this comic. Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
I thought what was interesting too is Lacey is the first fully empathetic AI sex worker. I hate to say robot, that feels reductive, but um, AI creation, and yet and because of that, her uh, narration feels not only very empathetic, but there's like this undercurrent of sadness to it, right? Like she's a prisoner
Yeah.
and she knows she's a prisoner, and yet at the same time she's very naive about the rest of the world. What kind of challenges did writing that sort of multi-layered nuanced characterization pose for you?
Rather than challenges, I think it was actually very cathartic. I think if you actually look at my other work, it's all kind of equally sad. But I do believe in happy endings. And so, I'm a firm believer that the things that you go through, the trauma that you go through, if you can make it out on the other side and you are able to pick yourself back up, it makes you a stronger person, a better person, a more resilient person, a more empathetic person. If you let it, you can also become a terrible person like Mr. But it can actually add a lot to who you are as a person. And so I think, with a lot of my work, I put my characters through hell, but they come out on the other side better for it. And I agree with you. Lacey's kind of interiority is very sad because she's a prisoner, because she's trapped there. But it's also very sad because she's sad for the people around her. She feels the pain of other people, even the people that are abusing her. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the sadness actually stems from.
We have that scene in issue 1 where she's talking about Mister and how he calls her Mary and her that whole scene. I mean, it just struck me with how emotionally charged it was in, I mean, again, going back to that word empathy, right? Like he's clearly using her. Um and maybe his motives are to keep his deceased wife alive. Um but at the end of the day, he is absolutely using her, and yet she can't help but feel empathy for him.
Yeah.
I that's just masterful stuff.
Thank
Congrats. Yeah.
thank you. I
There's no
really
real question in there. It was just an observation of, well, I mean, because we want to humanize our characters, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to sit there and have, right cackling villains that just want to take over the world. That's boring.
Yeah.
Give me someone who I understand. And I think having your your protagonist uh be the POV, not only the POV character, but so able to quiet you, um, so able to give us a look into these other characters who might otherwise be reduced to cliches is not easy as a writer.
Yeah, I'm a pretty firm believer that there's no such thing as inexplicable evil. I think people are a byproduct of the things that they've had to experience and the environments that they've been in. That's not to say that you can excuse what they're doing, and it doesn't mean that they can just get away with anything. But I think that everyone at the end of the day is understandable to a certain degree. And I think that if you were to really hear someone's full life story, even if you don't agree with how they are, you can understand how they turned out to be who they are. And I think that's something that's very key to red light.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a sex comic, I mean, you just can't say that about this
Thank you.
by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. My
Yeah.
parents don't agree with that, but that's okay.
Well, I mean, critics are there. Some of the critics are there just to be haters. I like we and Chad, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think
You're
I am.
wrong.
We um we at Comic Watch, we really strive to be constructive in our criticisms when our reviews. So I mean, that way we're adding to the conversation. I think when you get to detracting in the conversation, then that's when criticism becomes illegitimate because it becomes personal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with red light, what I always think about is there's this very famous quote that everything is about sex except for sex. Sex is about power. Um, and so that's really kind of one of the underlying themes of red light. The sex is not used in the graphic novel as just like, here's some boobs and here's some tits. There's that too, which is great to look at. But it's also about the power dynamics that are happening between the characters, and also within Lacey herself.
So you mentioned a little bit ago that all your stories have happy endings, and with one more issue to go in this series, there's it's going to be interesting to see, how it all plays out. But was it originally supposed to be 4 issues, or were there things that you wanted to include that got cut because of story or anything, creative things?
No, sure. It was always supposed to be 4 issues. I think that I definitely had a lot of different ideas, but the AWA team did a really great job of kind of steering me in the right direction and really editing and trimming it down, into something that is what you see today and is, I think, the best version of it that it could be. And so that's kind of how Red Light came to be. And I think the 4 issues is kind of the perfect amount of time to spend with Lacey and really understand this world and really understand the journey that she's on and really complete her arc.
Are there other stories that you've contemplated telling that you could tell in this world?
I definitely, but I also have a million ideas for other worlds and other sort of comics and other characters. So we'll just have to see how the future
Yeah,
plays
you
out.
don't want to stereotype or typecast yourself as the sex robot writer. So
Yeah, but I might get typecasted as the sex writer. We'll see. We'll see
uh,
how the next few comics turn out.
yeah, you and Mirka and Dolfo have to do it. So if somebody, I mean, at least you're in good company.
Yeah, I mean, sex sells, right? At the end of the day. So
A
it's
while now, Chad.
So aside from Lacey, were there any other characters that you kind of grew attached to? I mean, I found myself wanting to know more about Benson, her tech
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah, I love Benson a lot. I think he is an incredibly precious human being, and I think there's definitely human beings in the real world that are like Benson, and they're what makes life doable. um, but honestly, like I'm also very attached to the not so great characters like Danson and Mister. I don't love them as human beings, but kind of like Lacey, I do understand why they are the way that they are. I wish they weren't, and I wish that they could be taught to be different or learn some lessons. But there is part of me that is attached to them, attached to their pain and attached to their complexity.
Now, I mean, I also, I don't know if it's, but Mars, the arms dealer that she gets to help her,
Yeah.
was there, when you were writing and researching him, how did you have, I'm not saying you like, you know, talk to arms dealers, but was there some,
Well, funnily enough, actually, one of my high school friends and my first boyfriend was actually an arms dealer, or is an arms dealer. But he's not the inspiration for Mars.
That's
But
definitely not the answer I was expecting.
um, yeah, his family deals Mars, but he's not Mars. But that's I won't say that there wasn't a nugget of that in my brain somewhere when I decided to put an arms dealer in red light. But I was trying to think of, who would have the power, who would have the means, and most of all, who would have the personality type to be willing and able to rescue or kidnap, or however you want to put it, Lacey from her prison. Because, Benson is a great person, but I don't think he has the means, nor does he have the really personality for it to be able to break her out of a prison like that. And so you kind of need a character like Mars is very who thinks that he deserves everything in the world, who thinks he has the power to claim everything in the world in order to get Lacey out of this prison that Mister has constructed for her. But again, this is not my first boyfriend. I just want to make that clear.
I also kind of found myself wanting to know a little bit more about the uh, guy that Mister sends to retrieve her. I
Yeah.
mean, he's one of her, I guess, Johns or what. But and he seems to have a connection with Lacey too, and I'm interested to see how that kind of plays out.
Yeah, Jansen, I think and I think we see these kind of men in the real world too, where they do actually care about someone, but they're so traumatized that they won't let themselves admit it to themselves or admit it to the people around them. And so I think there is a connection between Danson and Lacey, and I think there is something that Danson does care about for Lacey, but he's so damaged of a person that he's never going to be able to act in a way that is caring for her. And so that's kind of who Danson is at his core. And it's actually quite tragic and it's quite sad when you think about it.
So overall, who are kind of your writing inspirations? I mean,
Yeah.
let's. I know you've mentioned some of your favorite comics and stuff like manga, but are there any writers, and they can be from comics, from literature,
Yeah.
that kind of inspire you, or you like to kind of take your style from? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think from the comic book world, I love Alan Moore a lot. I mentioned Killing Joke as one of the first comics that really got me into the world. And I also really love Watchmen. And what I love about Alan Moore is he really creates psychologically complex characters in very complex situations. Not everything is black and white. There's a lot of layers to each of the situations that he builds and each of the characters that he builds. And there's so much going on under the surface. I think in the manga world, I really love Junjo Ito. I think He created Tomi as well as Uzumaki, and I think he is a fantastic artist, and his brand of horror is so unique to him. And I think he creates some really stunning set pieces that I don't know how a sane person thinks of those things. So he's probably not sane, but what good artist is. And in the film world, he's not a writer, but David Fincher is one of my favorite directors of all time. Um, I love his body of work, whether it's Seven or Zodiac or Fight Club, which actually brings me to Chuck Palahniuk, which is one of my favorite uh, writers of literature. I think he does stream of consciousness extremely well. I think he delves into very taboo topics in a very nuanced and complex way. And so those are kind of the people that I really look up to and admire.
And then once red light wraps, are there just any other broader types of comics that you would like to kind of tackle next? Like, you know, no, besides Android, 6.
So usually when people ask me what I like to write about, I tell them there's two buckets. It's blood, drugs, death, murder, sex, or it's weird, zany, banana shit crazy. And sometimes ideally both.
Hmm.
So I think whatever you see from me next is going to land in one of these two buckets. And we'll see what form that takes. But I love horror. I love erotic thriller. I love psychological thriller. I love action. I also love dark comedy. I love stoner comedy, and I love genre bending as well too. So I like combining a couple different genres together. So we'll see. Yeah.
And I mean, is there any artists that you would be your dream person to work with on a project?
I would be honored. At this point in my career, I only have one comic out, so I would be
That's a
honored
great one.
yeah, any artist wants to work with me, to be honest. I would love to work with Priscilla again in a heartbeat.
Mhm.
And there's a ton of other really fantastic artists at AWA. I think that they curate their artists and writers very, very well. And they also pick just good people. And so I want to work with someone who is a combination of talented, but also just a good person. And that is strangely very hard to find in the world.
So,
Um,
oh, go ahead, Chad.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, like, moving forward, have you? I know you've got a lot of stuff that you're interested in getting out there. Have you been talking to any other publishers about your next project? Or, I mean, is it safe to say AWA is home for now?
I think for now, AWA is home. I really love the people there. Maybe in the future, I can talk to some other publishers, but for now, I'm having a great time at AWA. So if it's not broke, you know, and I am very, very appreciative of the opportunity that they've given me. And Axel, from the very beginning, really believed in me, probably more than I believed in myself. um, and I don't take that lightly. And just having worked in entertainment for such a long time, it's actually very hard to find good people who work in the industry. And so, when you find good people, I think you should stick with them. So that's kind of where my head is at right now.
And about how long did it take you like to bang out an issue writing it? Um,
It varies. I'm a very fast writer, just in general. To give you kind of a sense, I can bang out like a movie in about 3 weeks. So, which is unusually fast. So with comics too, I write incredibly fast. But there's a back and forth that happens.
mhm.
And there's an editing process, and we want to really make the writing as strong as possible and also make sure it matches up with the art. So that can vary a little bit. But strictly the writing for me, I plan a little bit, but to be honest, it's kind of stream of consciousness for me. It kind of like erupts from somewhere very primal for me and somewhere deep in my soul. And for example, like the first issue, the first like 10 pages or so, I immediately saw it like in an instant. I think I was like driving, and then I immediately saw how it should play out, what like Lacey's dialogue would be, what the images would be. And that's just kind of that's kind of my work style.
So what does your work life balance look like? Do you write as the muse strikes? Do you keep a schedule for yourself, like strictly 8 to 5? Uh, or how does that work for you? What's your method like?
So one of my biggest flaws is I'm extremely undisciplined as a person. So I can never stick to my own schedule, but I do very well with external deadlines. So, when I'm working with people, I never miss a deadline. And so having kind of that external team keeping me on track really helps me out. If it wasn't for that, it's very much like when inspiration strikes or never. So it's good to be able to have these projects. I think keeping me writing and keeping me active and keeping me creative.
I know there's one more issue for the series, but when it eventually gets traded, do you foresee any like bonus material or stuff like that that might be included?
We'll see. As of right now, I don't think so. I think that the four issues together is kind of what the trade is going to be, with some maybe beautiful art in between, but we'll have to see. There's a couple
Mhm.
months between, now and when the trade is released, so, we'll keep you updated on the AWA Instagram page, on the website.
Do you have I know that there's the regular covers and then there's also variant covers that have been also done with the book. Do you have a one that you're particularly, fond of or have a favorite?
Yeah, so from the first issue, the main cover by Jeff Deckel, the moment I saw it, I fell in love with it. Um, that is one of my favorites. I also love the erotic homage variants from issue 3 and issue 4. And then honestly, it's kind of like picking your babies,
Mhm.
or choosing between your babies. It's very Sophie's choice. I think each one, there's an incredibly strong artistic message behind each one, and you can tell there's a lot of care put into each one, and each one is so unique. So I am very lucky where I get free copies of every single variant. um, so I'm able to have the whole array of them. So yeah, so it's very hard to choose. And honestly, even with some friends of mine, they ask to get every single variant for me, which I gladly give them. But yeah, it's fantastic. My mom, for some reason, really gravitates towards the erotic homages. I'm not exactly sure why. um, but yeah, so on like one of her tables, it has like issue 1, and it's like Sarah Cho's masterpiece of erotic fiction in big letters, just kind of sitting on her desk. So yeah.
So what are some comics that are being published right now that you're gravitating towards? What are some of your favorites?
Yeah, I mean, I love everything that AWA is doing. I'm gonna push them a lot, not just because I work with them, but because I think they do fantastic work. I think Ribbon Queen is great. I think in the manga world, there this one's been completed, but the anime is still going. But Hell's Paradise is a fantastic manga to read, and it's also pretty short as far as mangas go. So I would definitely push that one out as well too. And yeah, I guess those would be my two recommendations. I could give like also just to throw one out because I'm Korean, so I want to rep the Koreans in the manhwa world. Solo Leveling is fantastic. So yeah, those would be kind of my recommendations.
How do you feel the book so far has been received by readers?
It's been real. It's honestly surpassed any expectation that I've had. I've actually had fans message me on like Instagram and send me very sweet, very touching messages that I really appreciate. Critically and also commercially, it's done pretty well. It's made a couple of lists, and also some, comic book shops have picked it as, the staff pick of the week, which is such an honor for me. And Yeah, I think when right before I started writing it, I had a dinner with some AWA people, and I was like, I will try my best to make a great comic for you. um, uh, Kind of in the vein of like, under promise, over deliver, but also because I had never written a comic before. And so to see it received so well has been truly an honor. And I hope to continue making fans proud, and continue making comics for the comic book community, that people relate to and see themselves in, and also make them think a little bit about the world around them.
Now, on the kind of the flip side of that, have you heard? I mean, besides the smut, it's just smut. Has there been any other, I don't know, pushback or
Uh,
about I mean about the way you're portraying sex workers and stuff like that and advocating.
Yeah, so far not. I haven't actually gotten any pushback in that arena. I've maybe seen like one or two comments online criticizing the writing, but that's okay. A taste error. That's totally fine. But I actually haven't gotten any pushback from the sex worker community or people in that arena, which I'm very thankful for. And obviously, if there are any criticisms about it, I am all ears because, I want to listen and I want to learn. But so far, I think it's been received pretty well, which, thank God.
Are you your own worst critic? I mean, now that it's wrapped up and the last issue is fixing to come out, do you look back on anything and be like, "Oh, I should have done this differently, or I could have done this better"?
I think I'm my own worst critic right before the issue comes out. So when I first get the pages, I'm like, people are gonna hate me, hate this, I'll be disappointed, whatever. But then actually, once I get the hard copy and I actually read it, I'm like, oh, okay, I like this. This is great. So I think it's more. Anxiety probably right before release dates. Yeah. So I'm not gonna say I'm the best writer ever because I clearly am not. But I'm pretty proud of Red Light and I'm pretty proud of what I put out there.
I'm going to get controversial now.
Okay, ready. I'm
So
ready for it.
so I mean, the book is about AI, and you said that you're an AI trainer. Where do you see AI going with comics? Because I mean, there's the debate of it sources people's work and
Yeah,
all stuff like that. What's your take on I guess the future of AI and
yeah.
where we're
Um,
going besides sex workers?
yeah, yeah. I will say from my time as an AI trainer, AI is terrible at comedy. It's really bad at writing jokes. Um, it's
And
also not
hands.
yeah, I don't know. There's something about comedy it just can't quite grasp. It's very off the mark. So I think comedians might be safe for a while. I will also say with songwriting, it doesn't quite hit the mark yet. And in terms of like writing, it can write beautiful descriptions. Like if you tell it to write, describe a beach on a gloomy day and X, Y, and Z, it can do that. But I think when it comes to other storytelling elements like character development and character arcs and relationships and relationship dynamics, we're still pretty far. My fear moving forward is, I don't think AI can match human talent right now in terms of art. My fear is that the people with money don't care and they will settle for subpar art. if it's cheaper to them. And that's, I think, where my fear is. I think AI can be a terrific tool, but I don't think it should replace people until we get to the point where it's like Lacey, where she is her own person and she has her own experiences and she's lived her own life. Then she can write her own art, right? Because then she's writing
or
from
write her own comic.
or write her own comic. Yeah, and maybe she'll shit on me if I told her story. I think at that point, then yeah, AI art is genuine because it's kind of the synthesis of their own experiences. But until AI gets to that point, I don't think AI art is the same as human made art. But we'll see what the money people think, and we'll see what the people with power think. And that's the one fear that I have.
Matt,
Uh, no, I was just going to piggyback off of that a little bit and say that the common when it comes to AI and art, the common complaint is that the AI is taking from flesh and blood artists to make
Absolutely.
its own thing, whatever you want to call it. I mean, how do you feel about that? And like when it comes to things like Chat GPT writing people's theses for them and things like that, like I don't know, I just personally I kind of start turning into a luddite. But as an AI trainer, you've clearly got a different perspective on things like that, and you're at least able to see silver linings and things.
I
It's
wouldn't
not all
quite.
doom and gloom, I assume.
I wouldn't quite say that. I think I still have existential crises working as an AI trainer, but we all got to pay the bills somehow. um, but it definitely
Fair.
does. It does make me spiral once in a while. Contributing to this, and it does make me second guess things. But due to certain health circumstances and other circumstances in my life, there's actually not a lot of other work that I can do in between writing jobs. It's kind of not so much a choice as just there is not many options for me. But what I will say is, what you're talking about and taking from, real life artists and stealing their work, that is a travesty. I think there has to be a business model where at least, if the AI is going to take from those artists, there has to be a payout and there has to be an agreement. It can't just steal from the internet people's work. And it's the same with writing as well, too. Like we don't want like people feeding it, a bunch of people's writing for free and stealing. This is the same with writing as well as with illustrative art, stealing the style that they have worked their entire lives to develop, and worked their entire lives to develop their skills for. So I think that there's definitely issues there, with like theses, like you were talking about at like the academic level. I think there's going to be a transformation in education. As ChatGPT becomes more prominent, you know, grades can't just be dependent on like if you're able to put together an essay. I don't know what the future of academics looks like just yet, but I do hope it kind of leans in the direction of where people are learning just to learn and not for grades. They're learning because they are passionate about it. And studies have shown that if you actually remove the grade element, people actually learn better rather than worse. And it's been proven in like several schools and also in other countries' education systems. And so we'll just have to see. AI is going to change up a lot of things. I just hope that the government is able to support the people when it does. I think universal basic income and making sure that people are able to provide for themselves, to be able to house themselves, feed themselves, support their families as AI kind of transforms the job market. I think all of that's going to be essential. And so there definitely has to be protocols in place and there has to be guardrails in place. So the next couple decades, I think it's going to be very touch and go. It's going to be very tricky, but I think we have to advocate for ourselves as a people and make sure that people with power don't want to let go of power. And when they see a way to utilize a tool like AI to make them more money, to make them more powerful, to give them more control, we need to find ways to protect ourselves. So that's my soapbox for today.
So how with the rate at which AI grows and for lack of a better term, evolves. I mean, how do you keep up with that? In your opinion, I mean, I'm not the expert, but you're a few steps closer to it than I am.
I'm definitely not an expert, but what I will say is I don't. I think AI is developing exponentially. That is very true. But I do think that a lot of the headlines that we're seeing makes it seem bigger than it is. Not for work, but just to make like pitch decks. I have experimented with like Midjourney, for example. Um, Not for money, not for work, just to create like sort of like samples for myself. And there is still restrictions, like you can tell it be behind the couch, center the TV, create a living room, and it just won't do it for you. So you can create these really stunning images or these really stunning videos, but like it's actually not totally following what you're saying. And so I think like the advertisement is great because you can see these really beautiful images and really beautiful art. But when it comes to actually utilizing this tool, I think we're still a couple steps away. Um,
Or maybe the machine is already rebelling and we just don't see it yet.
Maybe that too. That too.
I mean, that's the only other logical conclusion.
Yeah, it's telling you you're bad. Yeah, you have bad taste.
Yep.
That's telling.
That's what it's doing. Instead of Terminators, it's art critics.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
whenever I see an AI ad picture, I always play the what the game find the things that are wrong.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And yeah, at the end of the day, also AI has to be trained by a human. There has to be someone on the other end of the computer saying this is good, this is bad. My job as an AI trainer, I just read AI samples and I rate it. That's literally my entire job. And so, there's still going to be a gap, I think, before we see AI truly flourishing. But I could be wrong. I'm not a scientist. I'm not at like the high level at these AI companies. But I think we have a little bit of time to put these guardrails in place. But I think it is imperative that we do that.
Well, we're coming up against our hour, so we've got time for just a couple more questions. Chad, by all means.
Oh,
I
let's
know.
see. Oh, what do you want people to take away from the book,
Uh, I
if
think
anything?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, whatever I write, I want people to take things away. Yeah, because I think art can change how you view yourself and other people in the world. So I think generally that's what I want Red Light to do. And I think if there were two things I really had to narrow in on, one, going back to destigmatizing sex work, part of why I crafted Lacey to be the person that she is I wanted to show that sex workers can be smart, can be beautiful souls, can be kind, can be caring, despite their occupation and despite what other people might think. I think the second thing that I want people to take away from is the importance of empathy, and understanding that everyone has a backstory, but also understanding that you also need to protect yourself. You can't just empathize with every single person on the street, because you're going to get hurt. And I've learned that lesson many times. And that's kind of why I wanted to put it into a comic.
So I'm going to get deeply philosophical with you for for the last question here,
Sure.
and that's it, leaving the world out of it for a moment and just focusing on this country. I would say it's gotten a lot meaner spirited in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And I'm wondering, like, how does one continue to keep an optimistic sense of empathy in your perspective in the face of just nastiness out there right now?
Yeah, no, I feel you. And I will say I can't do it every day. I come from an activism background, and so when I see the things that are happening right now, I often say I hate people and I hate the world. um, uh, but I think at the end of the day, you have to come back to understanding that the entire world is not like that. I think that there are a small amount of very good people. I think there are a small amount of very bad people. And I think there are a lot of people caught between. And it's really the system that I think encourages and tries to demonstrate that you have to be a bad person to get ahead. Um, and I think understanding that has made me more motivated to try to change the world so we're not under such an oppressive philosophy. And then I think the second thing that really helps me is my personal relationships. Realizing that there are good people in the world. There are people who love me, who try to love the world as much as they can, who have incredible qualities. And I think that ch- keeps me a little bit on track. But I agree with you. The world is tough out there. Our country is shit right now. I'm just gonna put it bluntly. Um,
Well,
it's
I mean, the philosophy of radical kindness should not be radical, right?
it's
It shouldn't have to be, but yet here we are. Um,
yeah.
I appreciate the underlying optimism and just human compassion that you brought to the work in Red Light, and just this last hour getting to know you a little bit. I really thank you for leading with your heart in as far as your work goes, and I really genuinely hope that your comics journey and writing journey and life journey continue to magnify that in you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You
And it's
bet.
been such a lovely talk talking to both of you guys.
Thank you.
And good luck with yeah, you're at 215 episodes. I hope you have 500 more.
Oh
And
no, Chad. Ah,
That's our goal by next week.
yeah.
wait.
Just
How long do you think these episodes are going to be? Oh
yeah.
my goodness. Well, Sarah, where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, so I have a personal Instagram, but you guys are welcome to follow it. It's public. It's at sarah.h.show. Um, it's long because there's actually another Sarah Cho who's also a screenwriter and also a director. It's very unfortunate. So the H is very important.
Oh,
Yeah, so you can find me there. I don't have a Twitter, weirdly enough. Or
Probably for the best.
anymore.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So you can follow me on Instagram there.
Okay.
And it's mostly personal stuff, but once in a while I'll post something that's work related.
Very cool. Well, the book is Red Light. The creator and author is Sarah Cho. Thank you so much, Sarah, for hanging out with us tonight.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. I really appreciate your thoughts and perspectives on things, and we really appreciate you for listening. Thank you very much. Um,
We're back next week.
we're back next week. Awesome. Are we ready to reveal who we've got next week? Because if
It's
I'm
it's
pretty
it's
excited.
no it's Kevin Rodatelli of Massive Comics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. Well, thank you again for listening. And like we discussed, the world out there kind of sucks right now, but it doesn't have to. Get out there, do something kind for somebody, support your local comic book store. Just get
It's
out
Free
there.
Comic Book Day this weekend.
It's free comic book day this weekend
Yeah.
on Star Wars Day on a Saturday. How much more radical can you get than that?
There are
I
some
love
good
it.
things in the world.
Look, serendipitous. Has serendipity has smiled upon the Nerd Nation this weekend. So, thank you all, and we'll see you next time. Good night.